Attention drivers across Canada. Big changes are here in 2026 that could land you huge fines or even get your license suspended. And most people don't even realize it. Stick around because we're breaking down everything you must know to stay on the road legally. And if you want to make sure you never miss life-saving updates like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Your license and your wallet will thank you. In early 2026, drivers across Canada are waking up to a road traffic reality that has fundamentally changed how they think about their driver's licenses and the obligations tied to every time they get behind the wheel. And if you're watching this right now and you drive in any part of Canada, from the bustling streets of Toronto to the wide-open highways of Alberta, from the coastal highways of British Columbia to the snowy roads of Quebec, this is absolutely essential information that could save you from devastating fines, suspension of your license, or even more serious legal consequences, because this new wave of license regulations that have just come into force are not your typical minor updates that most people forget about. Instead, they represent a dramatic shift in enforcement, technology, and accountability that will change how drivers interact with authorities at roadside inspections and how provincial governments monitor compliance with basic licensing rules. The first thing you need to understand is that the Canadian provinces, while always having had their own individual traffic laws and penalties, have collectively moved toward much stricter real-time enforcement of license verification and documentation. And this means that what used to be considered small oversights, like failing to update an address on your license, forgetting to renew your probationary license on time, or even minor administrative delays in updating your insurance information, can now trigger fines that are hundreds or even thousands of dollars and can lead to immediate roadside suspensions that simply didn't happen in the past. With the introduction of new digital verification systems now widely deployed by police forces from coast to coast, officers no longer need to rely on paper documentation or manual checks. They can instantly access a driver's license status, insurance status, and history of suspensions through connected databases, and what used to be a quick visual glance at a card in your wallet has now evolved into a comprehensive digital audit that can flag issues in seconds. And for many drivers, this represents a cultural shock because so many of us have lived our lives assuming that a card in our wallet meant we were covered or that a slight delay in updating an address was no big deal. These new systems mean that there's no more room for casual mistakes, and the penalties have become serious enough that even long-time drivers who have never previously had an issue are now facing fines that can exceed 2,000 Canadian dollars for offenses that were once considered administrative or minor. For example, provinces have enacted statutory changes that impose hefty financial penalties for failing to promptly renew or update your driver's license, for driving with an expired license, for failing to correctly display or update license endorsements, and for not having your insurance and registration records up to date in the national digital systems. And while the specific penalties vary slightly from one jurisdiction to another, the overall theme is uniform. Administrative compliance is now enforced with the same seriousness that has traditionally been reserved for dangerous driving offenses, and police officers have been given expanded authority to suspend licenses on the spot without needing to take you to a courthouse or issue a simple ticket that you could dispute later. As a result, one of the most significant changes that drivers need to be aware of is the speed and immediacy with which enforcement occurs. In the past, driving without the right paperwork often resulted in a ticket that gave a grace period to correct the documentation, but under the new 2026 regime, roadside checks can trigger an automatic suspension that takes effect instantly, and once that suspension is in force, you can be fined for continuing to drive, have your vehicle impounded, and face escalating penalties if you disregard the suspension. This dynamic has caught many people off guard simply because most drivers were never accustomed to thinking of license compliance as something that could be verified in real time, and many did not realize how aggressively the provinces were moving toward digital enforcement. Another critical component of these regulatory changes that has profound implications for everyday drivers is the integration of cross-jurisdictional license databases that mean your driving record and license status in one province can now be instantly accessed by police in another, and this has eliminated many of the historical loopholes that allowed people to evade fines or suspensions simply by crossing provincial lines. If you have an outstanding license suspension in one province, that suspension will now show up in national verification systems and can be enforced in another province, which means there is truly nowhere to hide if you ignore the new rules. Provinces have invested heavily in upgrading their digital infrastructure with the express purpose of harmonizing license records, insurance verification, and violation histories. And while this modernization effort has been lauded by road safety advocates for its potential to reduce unlicensed or uninsured driving, it has also created a compliance burden that catches many drivers unprepared. The reality is that these changes are not incremental, they are transformational. And for millions of Canadians who drive every day to work, school, or family activities, it means that a failure to understand and adhere to the new regulations can result in fines that are significant enough to impact household finances and suspensions that can disrupt daily life. One of the most talked about aspects of the new regulations is the standardization of fines related to license documentation offenses. In the past, fines could vary widely depending on the province, the discretion of the officer, and the nature of the offense. Starting in 2026, however, many provinces have aligned their penalty structures so that administrative oversights like driving with an expired license or failing to update your insurance information can result in fines of up to $2,000 or more, and repeat offenses can trigger escalating fines as well as license suspensions of 30 days, 60 days, or even longer, depending on the severity and frequency of the infractions. In some provinces, repeat administrative violations are now being treated similarly to reckless driving under the law, which reflects a broader shift in how authorities view the connection between documentation compliance and road safety. Lawmakers have argued that keeping license and insurance information accurate and current is a foundational part of ensuring accountability on the roads, and that drivers who neglect these responsibilities can pose a risk to themselves and others because outdated insurance records or incorrect license details can complicate emergency responses, legal liability determinations, and enforcement actions when incidents occur. Consequently, the new penalties are designed not only to punish noncompliance, but also to incentivize drivers to take their administrative duties much more seriously than they have in the past, and for many drivers, this has been a wake-up call. Another major element that has drawn significant public attention is the way in which roadside verification technology now operates. Many police departments across Canada have adopted mobile digital terminals that allow officers to run instant license checks using cellular or satellite-connected devices. And these systems instantly reveal not only whether a license is valid and current, but also whether the driver's insurance matches the vehicle being operated, whether there are unpaid fines or outstanding warrants tied to the license number, and whether there are prior suspensions on record in any province. This represents a dramatic technological leap from previous methods that often required manual database queries back at a station, or that relied on limited information provided by the driver. The new approach means that there is near instantaneous transparency into a driver's compliance status, and it has changed the interaction between drivers and enforcement officers fundamentally, because what used to be a routine traffic stop can now escalate if the digital records reveal problems that would previously have taken days or weeks to uncover. This can include issues as seemingly minor as an outdated address that was not updated within the legally required time frame, or as serious as an insurance mismatch, and once those issues are detected, officers have clear authority under the new regulations to levy fines, suspend the license on the spot, or take other enforcement actions without delay. To put it bluntly, drivers cannot rely on the idea that problems will be sorted out later in court, because in many cases the enforcement action is immediate and non-negotiable. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the new regime, and the one that has generated the most discussion, is how strictly impaired and dangerous driving penalties have now been restructured, particularly in provinces like Ontario, where lawmakers have pushed the envelope on zero-tolerance approaches. In addition to the stricter administrative compliance penalties, The provinces have also expanded the range of circumstances under which a license can be suspended instantly for suspected impaired or dangerous driving, and the thresholds for repeat offenders have been lowered so that multiple offenses within a defined long-term look-back period can trigger lifetime or multi-year bans, mandatory treatment programs, and other severe consequences. While there is broad public support for cracking down on impaired driving, the combination of technological enforcement, broad discretion for officers, and stiff penalties has led to a situation where many drivers feel the system has become unforgiving, even in cases where the evidence of impairment may be contested. These changes have been framed by public safety officials as necessary to save lives, and they point to data showing that impaired driving remains a significant contributor to fatal collisions, but there remains active debate in legal circles about how these expanded authorities are being used and whether they afford drivers sufficient rights to contest enforcement actions. Related to this, the new enforcement environment has also impacted how drivers think about everyday compliance behaviors, such as renewing licenses on time, promptly updating any personal information changes, ensuring insurance records match the vehicles they operate, and being aware of how quickly outstanding fines or administrative issues can escalate into license suspensions. In the past, a driver might receive a reminder letter or an email notice about an expiring license. Now, the emphasis has shifted toward more stringent obligations on drivers to proactively manage their records, because failure to do so can result in fines without notice, immediate suspension, or even vehicle impoundment in some jurisdictions. This has created a sense of urgency for many Canadians who were previously complacent about administrative aspects of driving, and it has also driven a surge of inquiries to provincial licensing authorities from drivers seeking clarity on compliance requirements. Many people have been surprised to learn that something as simple as forgetting to report a new address within the required time frame can be treated the same way as other serious documentation offenses, and that not knowing about these new regulations is not considered a valid excuse in the eyes of the law. The broad interpretation of compliance obligations means that there is a real personal responsibility on every driver to stay informed about their license status and to treat these requirements with the same seriousness they would bring to critical safety checks like vehicle maintenance or obeying road signage. On a practical level, the implementation of these new rules has led to some confusion and frustration among drivers who feel overwhelmed by the level of detail required to remain in compliance. But provincial officials have responded by emphasizing public education campaigns, online portals for license management, and automated renewal reminders that aim to make the administrative responsibilities easier to manage. These systems allow drivers to set up notifications well in advance of expiry dates, track required updates, and verify that their records are aligned with national databases. But officials have also made it clear that the responsibility ultimately rests with the individual driver. In addition, legal advocates have cautioned that drivers need to exercise care because ignorance of the law is not a defense. If a license is suspended due to an oversight and you continue to drive, you are subject to severe additional penalties, which can compound quickly and result in outcomes that far exceed the original administrative fine. This has led to an increased demand for information about compliance best practices, including how to monitor your license status, how to handle notices from provincial authorities, and how to avoid common pitfalls that could result in unexpected penalties. In response to these concerns, many driving schools, advocacy groups, and legal advisors are stepping up to provide resources that help drivers navigate the new landscape. But the sheer scope of the changes means that there is no substitute for personal vigilance when it comes to your license and documentation. While the broad public conversation has focused on the negative consequences of the new regulations, the heavier fines, the potential for immediate suspensions, the aggressive enforcement, it's also important to recognize the intent behind the reforms, which is to enhance road safety, ensure better accountability, and create a system where driving privileges are tied directly to compliance with the fundamental responsibilities that come with operating a vehicle. Proponents of the changes argue that by tightening administrative enforcement and by leveraging modern technology, provinces can reduce the number of unlicensed and uninsured drivers on the roads, minimize legal ambiguities, and improve overall public safety outcomes. And they point to early data suggesting that areas with robust digital verification systems have seen measurable declines in certain categories of non-compliance and vehicle-related incidents. However, the transition has been far from smooth for many people, especially those who are used to older, slower enforcement paradigms, or those who travel regularly between multiple provinces and find themselves needing to keep track of varying regional requirements within a unified national enforcement framework. At the core of all these changes is a basic recalibration of how driver responsibility is defined and enforced, and as a result, the consequences for noncompliance have grown enormous compared to what many Canadians have experienced in the past. As we continue to unpack these developments throughout 2026 and beyond, one thing remains clear. If you drive in Canada, you need to take these new license regulations seriously. You need to regularly check your compliance status. You need to stay informed about provincial requirements. And you need to treat your driver's license and documentation as critically important legal instruments, not just pieces of plastic in your wallet, because the days of lax enforcement and casual oversight are over, and in their place is a system that will hold you accountable in a way you've never seen before, with real financial consequences and immediate enforcement actions that can change your life if you're not prepared. Let this be a wake-up call for every driver, from the youngest new license holder to the most experienced road veteran. The rules have changed. Enforcement has changed, and compliance isn't optional. It's essential if you want to stay on the road legally and avoid the heavy fines, suspensions, and legal trouble that are now part of the 2026 Canada driving landscape.